Right now, what I want to talk about is, well, maybe in response to some questions I've been getting about the actual raising of children. Again, we're trying to do this in line of setting down principles so we understand where we're headed in our whole human development and just how to live generally better, right? And so it all starts with how you're being raised. That's where it all begins. And so the question is, what were some basic principles for forming boys and girls generally? I like to usually separate them, but there are basic principles which apply to both of them. There's so many avenues here to start with. It's hard to even know where to begin. One of the areas I think I do want to begin, though, is basically when parents form their children, they form them to be social. In other words, we form them for human relationships. Obviously, yes, even relationship with God, but relationships with one another. Now, even those relationships come in three areas. Social, that is outside the home itself, domestic, and even individual. I think it's important, and this may sound a little esoteric and kind of almost too intellectual, but it is the case that children even need to be formed individually. In other words, that they have enough individual time and downtime, because a person, if they can't connect with themselves and be comfortable with themselves, they're not going to be comfortable with others. It's just the way it happens. And so even Jesus asked that his own disciples have individual time. And those people who are able to spend that, even growing up, that they can actually relate to others better because they're integrated with themselves. Because it's hard to relate to another, or almost impossible, if there's not harmony within your personal soul. And so other experts I've seen talk about the division after that of being domestic and then being social. So domestic means around the household arena. This is one of the reasons why children should ideally be formed within a family setting where there are brothers and sisters, where there's a lot of human interaction. It's a shame that in today's day and age we tend to form such that we form for those outside the home, so they get more social formation and not much domestic. And the family spends very little time today. And so what I find is that families should be more conservatively attentive to trying to rid of some of those extra activities that really don't help that much, at least for the family. Because if we don't preserve the family, we're not going to be preserving something so core and so basic to what it is to keep a sound and healthy and vibrant society. It's important to understand a society really is composed fundamentally of families. Yes, there's individuals in those families, that's true. But when we always look to the good of the family, things seem to better work overall in society, even for the individual. So the family, too, what I find, it's somewhat of a prototype as well. So whatever people learn in terms of habits within the family, they will take those habits into whatever other social arena they go into, whether it be school or church or any kind of civic engagement. They're much better prepared. So again, okay, so that's the domestic. In fact, in virtue of that, it's important, of course, in the age when I grew up, a family dinner was very vital, and I'm realizing the vast majority of families really don't take the time and spend that time for dinner, because that's where the family gets a communion. In fact, what's interesting too about that, I really believe one of the reasons why Christianity is falling in today's society, because the communion of the family, to gather around a meal, is somewhat of a prototype for the actual exercise of what it is to participate in liturgy. So liturgy, of course, is beyond what a meal, but it takes in some way the form, even the Mass. So even we've called it a supper, a Last Supper. So even a good, well-formed life with habitual table eating with the family, I think is vital. And again, it makes a paradigm not just for faith, but for everything else. And so even businesses run a certain way where people need to see that in business there are people in charge, there are authorities. And so the father usually figures it at home. And the mother also, she has the second area of authority. And so out the gate, children have a way of seeing the table too as a way of an exercise of authority and hierarchy. Even in lands of old, they used to they used to seat people in light of hierarchy. And that usually happens too. Usually the father sits at a special place, the mother sits at his side, and usually oftentimes the oldest child who sits at the opposite side or near the father. And so even in the family, you see an authority structure at the table, and you see in some way a hierarchy, which is very important for all of our development. So again, formation, individual, domestic, and social. Now, we may differ on the three areas of generally of human formation, which I always like to speak about, especially about manhood, and we'll get into that later. But there are three fundamental categories that I usually like to place the human person in, male and female, though I usually focus on male. But when discerning something about what belongs properly to a girl or a boy, is we must be in some way clear on some vision we have for what their mission is, their identity, and their journey. And so their mission, at the outset, I'll say for a male, is to be a leader, a protector, a provider. And so for male and female, it's priest, prophet, and king. Now, that would be their supernatural calling, but the natural one is for a male to be a leader, a protector, and a provider, and we'll get into that. But those are concrete roles by which a man has. We could attribute other roles to women, maybe such as a role toward her mothering seems to speak of so much of what she does and her nurturing capacity. But whatever we say, what we're forming the youth in terms of their natural mission needs to be established. Now, let me just bypass and just go on here. So the next area would be a person's identity. Now, what's important, I believe that for a man, it's to be a beloved son, a loyal brother, and a vital man, that a devoted husband, strong father, and veteran sage. Son, brother, man, husband, father, sage. Same thing with a young girl or a girl. A female would go for a beloved daughter to I would say maybe a devoted, a loyal sister, to a full woman, to a devoted wife, a vibrant mother, and to some extent we could say she also is a sage of sorts. I'm not sure what you say as sage in a female terms. I don't know, sages, I don't know. But in any case, the women also had those parallel roles and dimensions about them. And so in some way, as I've often held, is that the beloved daughter, it's where everyone starts, and it's the foundation upon which all these identities are stacked. And so we have the beloved daughter, and we have I would say the loyal sisters built on top of that. And so it, generally speaking, again, the parallel for boys and girls, males and females, you're going to be a good brother or a good sister based upon in some way that foundation of whether you were a beloved son or a beloved daughter. And I believe in the fullness of manhood and womanhood, that even leans upon being a good brother and then being a good son, being a good sister and being a good daughter. And if womanhood or manhood isn't in some way on these foundations, it will rock a bit. Why is that? In serving as women and men, and I'll say for that next stage, in some way you could say to be husband and wife, there's mutual exchange of love there. And it's important that the exchange of love, obviously, between spouses, be very healthy. Healthy love between spouses, first of all, in some ways incorporated upon healthy love, first is being loved by one's parents, right? Because in spousalhood, you eventually become parents. But one must integrate well with love with parents first as a beloved son and a beloved daughter. And hopefully, too, and that's extended too to aunts and uncles, right, who carry on that fatherhood and motherhood role. And so to grow in love with uncles and aunts is an important thing. But then also, the child must be formed, again, rising above that or progressing from there, to be a loyal brother, or I'll say, because I don't have another word, a loyal sister. So love must be equally exchanged between brothers and sisters, or brothers with brothers and sisters with sisters. And if mutual love isn't expressed well, and a person isn't, how would I say, secure in that, and finds their identity in that, and finds a sense of peace and a happiness in that, it's going to be otherwise hard to really love another spouse well. Because in love, there's always, in some way you could say, there's stages of love, where in love is a mutual thing. And so, yes, we want to exchange it first as beloved sons, beloved daughters, with parents, uncles, aunts, mentors, as on that fraternal sorority level amongst our peers. And then in some way, when we're fully grown adults, we should be able to relate with each other well. It's very important that even when a person discern that if they want to marry somebody, that person they marry have a healthy integration and socialization with other adults. And this is one of the things married people have to be wary of. Sometimes they may say about a future spouse or something, well, they just don't get along, or they prefer the opposite sex, or they just prefer being around only men, or whatever. But if there's some kind of defect in the way they act with other adults, both male and female, that should be a healthy interaction for which marriage is based upon. So in other words, these identities then are so key in establishing the identity of the human person in full mature spiritual growth. But then, as we spoke about, as they reach towards spousalhood, then it moves into parenthood. And a parenthood, you can't give that which you do not have. And so a parent, a mother and a father, are not going to be able to healthily give love unless they've really experienced it first. And they're not going to understand how to raise their children unless they've understand too of how the children are to get along. And so if a parent never really got along with their own brothers and sisters, it's going to be hard to form their children to get along with their own brothers and sisters, their own sons and daughters. And so after that too, it's important, again, forming for adulthood, that every parent have an idea of what all those qualities of adulthood are, so that they're conscious of forming those in the children. So in any case, that's what it is to move in identity. And I always like to say that in the formation of the human person, in establishing identity, I think it's very important to talk about the mentor or the sage phase. Now, I really believe that after a person has been perfected in fatherhood, motherhood, in some way there's a further perfection of being a sage, a mentor figure to others. Now, that mentoring really in some way happens the rest of your life, right? Or rather, what I mean by that is, even parents put the older children over the young children, right? The older child will actually guide younger children, even in the neighborhood or whatnot. And so, in the order of nature, the senior always, mentors the freshmen or the juniors or whatever. And so, there's always hierarchy in society. We can't avoid it. Why? Because those mature direct the less mature. Now, there's a crowning sage, a crowning mentor, I believe, in adulthood, where even the Catholic Church teaches how even development in character is a lifelong process. And we can grow, and certainly we're supposed to be growing in spiritual perfection, but even there should be a perfection of our human progress at the end of our life. And a healthy part of that perfection is even mentoring those at an older age. In fact, this is what I really believe gives meaning to the young person, meaning to the person generally, is that when they, even in old age, when their kids are out of the house, that they're still mentoring others. They'll help form and give a kind of loving guidance to those who are older. Because all of us, in some way, no matter how mature, even in the earthly and spiritual, and the natural and the supernatural level, there can always be a further growth in that development. And I just find that it's vital to see that as a perfection, because when one dies, especially a man, I see it more and more how a man's glory when he dies is about the men that he's mentored. Yes, the family that he's raised, the wife that he's loved, but it's the men that he's mentored. And two, one of the things that's lacking in today's day and age is, I think, women also who mentor other women. Young moms especially need a lot of mentoring and support from older women. And so, yes, it's not just a matter of of just mentally or intellectually guiding somebody. It's a matter, when I say mentoring or being a sage, it's also a matter of leading them through the things of life. And I just find that men need assistance. And so mentoring does include men helping younger men with projects or things that they need to get done or accomplished, or help them with their work goals. Men need to guide other men. It's just the way it is. And in some way, when they collaborate too, when they collaborate on projects, there's no such thing as equality. Usually somebody's higher than the other, right? And so even when men collaborate together on projects, there's always people who are in charge of certain areas who take like mentor positions or leadership positions. And that's just natural in the human order. And I just find that men find a certain glory, and women do too, when they work together and in collaboration with other women and develop things. And in that, you'll always find hierarchy, and you'll always find those who mentor over others.